The following is a Hoop Ball presentation. Welcome to the Fantasy NBA Today podcast.
I will say it was truly kind of my entire team to suck all at the exact same time. Just really kind. I don't know who got together, what they called a Dan team meeting to put together Wednesday night. I'm upset. We work so hard. We work so hard to get to this point. This is why. And, honestly, I might end up winning my weekly matchup anyway. It was such a brutal day. And it's days like this where in Roto, you kind of go, all right, on to the next one. And in a head-to-head playoff format, I'm going to be stewing about this day, potentially for an entire offseason, if it doesn't get itself shaped up. I will elaborate, maybe, a little bit later on. You guys know that I'm not in a good place this morning. Welcome to Fantasy NBA Today. I'm Dan Vespers. This is a Hoop Ball presentation. Thanks, as always, to our good buddies at Hawaiian Isles Kona Coffee Company for powering the Hoop Ball engine and also for giving out the second place prize in our DFS contest from last night. Congratulations to TJ Christie, who came in second. AJS Rochi? I don't know. Pronunciation, I don't have to get it right. AJS ROCHI. First place by a mile, 300 points on a rough fantasy night. This tells you everything you need to know. Last week, our DFS contest, you needed 300 points just to place in the top 20. This time, 300 points was the number one overall score by 25 points. I think it was like 244 to place this time around. Really low, really rough fantasy night all the way around. Anyway, to those of you, if you're listening to the podcast, who won first and second place, reach out, let us know, so we can send you your Hoop Ball t-shirt and your Hawaiian Isles Kona Coffee goodie bag. Exciting stuff. I lost. I got 30th, so I missed by 10 spots. I think I was about 9 DFS points out. I did okay. I held it together, all things considered. Avery Bradley took a wet dump on yesterday's DFS card for me. If I had almost anybody else at his price, I think I would have placed. But you know what? That's the way it goes. This is what happens on the short cards. You have to roll the dice a little bit. It just hurts more when you're so close and then come up dry. But that's not actually why I'm annoyed today. We'll talk about why as we go through some of the results from Wednesday. We'll turn our attention to Thursday. This will be, again, we'll have some streaming thoughts on today's podcast because I think that's really what most of you are coming for in the head-to-head format. And then we'll break down the box scores as well. So let's do that first. We'll go to Wednesday, 6-game card, really short Wednesday. Orlando lost in Washington. This was actually an interesting ballgame for a couple of reasons. Number one, more from a reality standpoint, the Wizards now have won 2 in a row and 5 of their last 10, and the Magic suddenly are 2 games out of a playoff spot. They're 2 games back of the Heat, who throttled the Pistons. And we'll get to that game in a moment. So the Heat now claw a little bit closer to the 7 seed. I don't know if that does a whole lot of good. You basically want to get to, I would say, the 6. The Nets are in the best position of these teams. They've got the 76ers, who are also a very difficult squad, but they're not the Bucks and the Raptors. I don't know. It doesn't really matter, I guess. So the Magic now find themselves in a tight spot. The Hornets are tied with the Magic, 2 games out of a playoff spot, and the Wizards are a game and a half back of those teams. So by all accounts, what we've seen here is that the Wizards haven't given up yet. They are also significantly better at home than they are on the road. And the Wizards host the Hornets on Friday. That's another huge ball game for them. The Grizzlies on Saturday in a back-to-back. And then the Jazz on Monday. So things get significantly harder for one game. Then they go to Chicago, another winnable ball game. So by all accounts, Wizards could actually, because they just beat the Kings, and they're just, they got to figure out a way to win a game on the road. The Wizards are at the end of that little stretch. Let's say they go 3-1 over their next 4 games. They actually could have a shot, which is great if you're a fan of one of those teams around them and hoping that that team is tanking. because I don't think the Wizards are going to make the playoffs. There's two teams in between them and the Heat. It's going to be a tough climb, and then their schedule gets tougher again. But it does change the who's tanking dynamic a little bit, or it keeps it the same. And in this ball game, not a whole lot of news on the Orlando side. Jonathan Isaac hit 3 3-pointers in a big third quarter to salvage what was otherwise kind of a rough basketball game. He had a block that apparently was taken away from him, so that's crummy. And otherwise, when a team scores 90 points in this day and age, there's just not going to be a whole lot of fantasy stuff to go around. On the Washington side, this was one of those Bobby Portis stinks games, so Thomas Bryant got rolling, and he had 21 and 10 with 2 blocks on 9 out of 12 shooting. He does this about 1 every 4 or 5 games, and if you can catch lightning in a bottle, well, you're the winner of all, and if you can't, you just have to accept he's almost become like the big man equivalent of Danny Green. 3 very quiet, but not crushing, not soul-crushing games, and then 1 big one. And at the end of it, you're like, oh, cool, he's inside the top 100. And that's Thomas Bryant these days. He had a 3-pointer as well. You can't ask for a whole lot more. One of the best lines of the night. After we had all basically given up on him. And then he'll probably go back now to mediocrity for 2 or 3 games, and then he'll surprise us again. Good luck figuring that one out. Either you ride all of it and you take your top 100 where you can get it, or you ride none of it. It's one or the other. The rest of the Wizards were pretty bad. Jabari Parker had 19 and 9 off the bench. That was solid. Trevor Ariza had 2 points in this game. He was terrible. Bobby Portis shot 3 for 11. He was terrible. Tomas Satoransky shot 1 out of 8. He was terrible. Jeff Green, 8 points. He was terrible. And they won. Magical, I suppose. Anyway, not a whole lot of changes in valuations from this ball game. Brooklyn loses at Oklahoma City. They got off to a pretty good start, and then Paul George caught fire in the third quarter, ended up with 25 and 9, 2 steals, 2 blocks. One of his better games really since the shoulder injury, and we'll see if that keeps up. Russell Westbrook, an efficient triple-double. He's been much better lately. Actually, you got to give credit where credit's due. He's, I don't want to say totally salvaged his season because he's had ups and downs throughout, and obviously the popcorn stuff has been great from start to finish, but the field goal percent for Russ has been improving, and over his last 5 games, he's been especially good. Can't hit a free throw to save his life. He's high volume, 65% basically at the free throw line this year, and that's weighing him down, but the fact that he's shooting closer to 45 to 50% over the last week, you just take the free throw issues, and at least it's not a field goal issue too. He is what he is. He's not a top 10 player anymore because he can't make foul shots. I don't know what happened. He just can't do it. On the Brooklyn side, they've got held to 96 points. So again, not surprisingly, not a whole lot of good fantasy stuff. Spencer Dinwiddie scored 25 points again. He's picked up the slack where Karis LeVert, who just doesn't really look healthy, is probably a drop. Jared Allen at 8 and 5 with a block, not great. D'Angelo Russell 14 and 7 with 3 steals, but 6 out of 18 shooting. Joe Harris had 3 threes. That's about the highlight of the whole thing. Dinwiddie's been scoring a lot. Give the credit over that side, but there are other things missing. Miami whipped Detroit in this one. Wayne Ellington was actually one of the lone bright spots for Detroit. When they don't get a big game out of Andre Drummond, they're in real trouble, and Drummond fouled out in 24 minutes of this one, so that's not good. Blake Griffin, 13 points, not good. Luke Kennard, 10 points, not good. It was Wayne Ellington. He was like the only good thing that happened in this game. Reggie Jackson hurt his ankle in the fourth quarter. If he has to miss any time, you'll probably see more Ish Smith. But again, we talked about what a fantasy number might be when you score 90 points. How about when you score 74? Yuck. And then, of course, on the Heat side, not too many guys hit their normal allotment of minutes. Derrick Jones Jr. saw 31 off the bench and still didn't manage to do quite enough with it. Josh Richardson was hot early and then kind of coasted the rest of the way. Deion Waiters hit 4 3-pointers. Justice Winslow had one of these games where he didn't have to shoot any free throws, so he didn't kill you in the percentages. Goran Dragic played only 19 minutes, but did have 10 and 4. A lot of mouths in Miami in a blowout game, and Kelly Olynyk had another slow one. I think the footnote on this game, one thing to keep in mind, Bam Adebayo only played 17 minutes as the starter, but he picked up fouls quickly. Only played the first 5 minutes of the game before picking up his second foul. I think he logged like another 3 or 4 maybe another 5 in the second quarter, and then he played his 7 minutes in the third quarter, and then it was over. So he was down about 3 minutes from what he might have normally been in this spot, because then he would probably play the final 5 or 6 minutes of the ball game, but he didn't need that, and then he missed out on 2 or 3 minutes in the first quarter. Do not panic. Hassan Whiteside got 20 minutes off the bench. I think that's probably the target for him right now, and that puts him around a top 100 value. I think he's worth owning, especially if he only takes one free throw. But Miami continues to be a pretty good mess. Memphis clobbered by Atlanta. Joakim Noah was very good off the bench. Mike Conley had 20. Delon Wright had 10 and 7, racked up some extra stats in garbage time. But, of course, the story of this one, C.J. Miles hit 8 3-pointers on his way to 33 points. And that is all she wrote on C.J. Miles. Delon Wright is, and I know he logged a bunch of minutes at the end of this ball game when it was already ugly, quietly starting to push his way into the Avery Bradley stuff. And he's available in a lot of leagues. He's only 15% owned in Yahoo League. So if you're into Delon Wright, and I know it's a bad streaming schedule right now, but he has significant upside if you don't need 3-pointers. Points, rebounds, steals, blocks, assists, usually okay percentages. The lack of 3-pointers does hold him down. So his overall value is always going to have that weird little hole in it. But the across-the-board stuff is what you'd be picking him up for. So keep an eye on that. Keep an eye on Delon Wright. His minutes seem to be trending up. And like I said, if you don't need 3-pointers, he's a guy that could be pretty useful for your team. Don't write him off. I mean, do write him off this week because, 2-game week and all. But in general, Jonas Valanciunas was terrible. This was one of the games that I was talking about where someone from my team was just terrible. Oh, man, I cannot believe how many guys on my team just decided not to show up at all today. Really overwhelming. That one was probably the worst of them. Valanciunas with 8 points and nothing else, effectively. He did have a block. Cool, man. Cool. I have Mitchell Robinson on that team. I don't need your one block, Valanciunas. Go score me 20 and 10. John Collins had a huge one. Micah Patria predicted that on yesterday's show. Trae Young played well. Kevin Huerter had 16. Alex Len had 20 off the bench. Taurean Prince, he's been quietly playing a lot better of late. 15 points, 3 threes, and a steal. Dwayne Dedmon started, played 22 minutes of the blowout. He probably would have played another 3 or 4 in the fourth quarter, maybe more. They didn't need it, but he still had his 2 steals and 2 blocks. It's been a perfect season for Dwayne Dedmon. Couldn't ask for much more. And Kent Bazemore shot the ball poorly, and so his minutes went away. And he's a drop, I think. I know that there's going to be those games where he plays 20 minutes, but the ceiling is gone. Golden State with a win on the road in Houston. They got a nice one out of Boogie Cousins. No Kevin Durant, so Boogie. Klay Thompson had 30. Steph Curry had 24 on a poor shooting night. He's been in a little bit of a mini slump. And as usual, when one of the big guys is out for the Warriors, it just means more for the other big guys. For the Rockets, James Harden had 29 and 10. Chris Paul was efficient in an odd twist, but didn't have any steals and only 3 assists in this ballgame. Warriors D'd up pretty well when it wasn't James Harden at the helm. The worry in this ballgame is the distinct lack of Kenneth Faried. We saw a ton of minutes for the starters for Houston. Mike D'Antoni was very reticent to use his bench in any capacity. I would hang on. I'm going to give Faried another ballgame. This felt more like the outlier. I think they'd like to get him in there for some hustle stats, but he was just getting exploited by the Warriors, and so there was no way to play him as a 4. And so he got his 13, basically his 10 minutes at center in this ball game and very little else. I mean, really, how are you going to play him against whoever the Warriors are running at the 4 spot? Especially if it was KD. Might have even been worse in that one. But finally, a game at least that wasn't a blowout here, this Houston Warriors game. Utah and Phoenix, another blowout. Joe Ingles got rolling in the second half. He continues his post-All-Star break surge. And then Ricky Rubio made his return. He played 22 minutes and was not particularly effective. But what it does with them being healthy is it means no Dante Exum. Kyle Korver's not going to play as many minutes. Royce O'Neal is not going to be relevant. So you move back to the main cogs. Jay Crowder's not going to see as many opportunities when they're fully healthy. So it's Favors, Gobert, Mitchell, and Ingles, the main 4. Those are the guys you're trusting on this team. that can expand to most of the other names I said if you are streaming. Phoenix was terrible in this game. Devin Booker did have 27 points, and that's not nothing. Mikal Bridges had his typical super efficient, low-usage game with 3 steals. Rashawn Holmes had 11 and 5 with 2 steals and a block because DeAndre Ayton got just smoked by Rudy Gobert. But overall, this was a bad one for Phoenix. They got beat up by a much better team. I think you can move along, and I don't think you have to change anything from a valuation standpoint. Quick look at what's coming up tonight, Thursday evening card. Another 6-gamer, OKC at Indiana. Not much going on in that one that we're monitoring. Cleveland, Orlando. Cavs should be mostly healthy, I believe. Larry Nance Jr. is still on the shelf. So we'll keep a watch on some of the guards on that team. So everybody can separate themselves, but it's mostly Kevin Love. Orlando, they're straightforward. Sacramento, pretty straightforward, although Marvin Bagley, we're keeping an eye on that injury situation. If he doesn't play, you could probably roll them on to Bielitsa out there. Boston, healthy from what we gather. Lakers, mentioned Kentavious Caldwell-Pope as someone who might be playing for a contract here down the stretch. Keep a close watch on him. Toronto, no Serge Ibaka, so this should mean more Marc Gasol. How much more is the real question. I don't think they want to go huge at center all game long, so you'll see them run some weird lineups out there. You might see some Siakam at the 5 even, but we should see 25 minutes out of Gasol, so this should be top 50, top 60 type numbers for the big guy. Minnesota, who's playing? Derrick Rose questionable, Jeff Teague questionable, Cat probable. Would be very interested to know who the hell is actually going to be in this ball game. Utah, pretty straightforward. Dallas, we saw Tim Hardaway Jr. move to the bench in their last ball game. We'll see if that gets flipped around again for this one. Rick Carlisle likes to mix and match on his way to a end-of-season tank. And then Denver, too many mouths to feed right now, although we did get word that they're taking Isaiah Thomas out of the rotation, and so maybe that'll free up a couple more minutes for a guy like, say, Monty Morris, who was really playing well before he had his minutes snatched away from him. Keep an eye on that. Again, more so as a potential streaming option. Denver has a 3 games in 4 days situation at the end of next week, and they actually go 6 games over 9 days. Am I getting that right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. They go 6 games over 9 days, stretched between the 21st and the 29th. So there could be some Denver guys that are worth using in that spell if you do the pickup on Thursday of next week. And that, I think, is a pretty good segue into our other large chunk of today's podcast, which is the streaming update. Well, a lot of folks were picking up Jazz and Wizards and Thunder on yesterday's card because they had the back-to-back coming up, and mostly that was a disappointment. Most of the fringe guys that were already owned, or most of the fringe guys that I should say were not already owned, didn't really do a whole lot. Kyle Korver hit 2 3-pointers, but that was basically all he did. Jay Crowder only hit 1 3-pointer. He did have a dozen points, and he's been okay for Utah. Guys like Royce O'Neal didn't play with Ricky Rubio back. Thunder, there really wasn't anyone on the fringe worth grabbing. If you rolled the dice on Thomas Bryant, that obviously worked out for you in a big way. That's the Wizards now. They don't have the back-to-back, but they do go 3 and 4 days. And Orlando, most of those guys are owned. Their bench is fairly useless outside of Terrence Ross. So it wasn't a great time to go for the back-to-back. On podcasts, I had advised going for Miami Heat, who get into this 7 games in 11 days stretch, and a lot of them put up okay fantasy lines in the blowout that really could have been better if it wasn't. The Pistons obviously had some terrible lines because I recommended them as a team that goes 4 in 6 days with a Sunday-Monday back-to-back mixed in there. Trying to think of who the last team was that we talked about on yesterday's podcast. I think Phoenix may have come up because they go once, then an off day, and then a back-to-back. But we can turn the page on that now because we're at the 14th, which means we're reassessing. There probably aren't too many moves that you're making today unless you're trying to get out from under a player that you really didn't like. So if that's the case, Sacramento has a good schedule. They go 7 times over the next 11 days. which that's one of those really nice ones we're talking about. You need a couple of back-to-backs blended in there, and they have it because they go 3 times the rest of this week, and then they go 4 times next week. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. 7-11 is a really nice stretch. So the Kings would be a good grab, especially if you want to maximize your games this week and you're not worried about Monday of next week. The Lakers are a team worth grabbing. They go 3 and 4 days to finish this week. They don't have a great schedule next week, so you'll probably want to bail out on the Lakers as early as Monday or possibly as late as Wednesday of next week. You're not going to ride them any longer than that because they have a couple days off. And then Phoenix, as I mentioned, is, we actually missed the boat on that one, but they would be a grab potentially tomorrow, so we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. We can bring that one up as we approach it. The recommendations I would make for those of you that are streaming, if you're in the first round of your playoffs, which is how I'm treating this week right now, because that's the standard, that's the default setting in most leagues, is not only are you trying to maximize your games for this week, but you're also trying to set yourself up to have a strong start to next week without having to use a bunch of moves on Monday. So the guys that I'm looking at, and it's why I've geared myself this way, are guys that go more times the rest of this week than whoever you're dropping, and also go more times at the beginning of next week than whoever you're dropping. Also, take a moment to make sure you don't have any maxed out days. I have a team where I have a maxed out Wednesday next week. This may or may not happen to you. I just happened to bumble upon it while I was setting some schedules out in advance. That might make a team like, say, the Charlotte Hornets a little more interesting. They go Friday, Sunday of this week. They don't go Monday, but they play Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday of next week. So they've got a 4-gamer, and that gives them 6 games over 10 days. Not great, not terrible, but it also doesn't put a team, a game on an overloaded day. You don't end up wasting a game that way. Let's look ahead to tomorrow. I think tomorrow is the day where more of you are going to be making moves, because if you picked up some of these teams with back-to-backs like Utah or Orlando or Oklahoma City, tomorrow is the day you're probably looking to make some moves towards the weekend. So my recommendation is look for a player going twice this week and then again on Monday. So basically a 3 and 4, 3 games in 4 days starting on Friday. And the teams that fit that mold are Chicago, Friday, Sunday, Monday. Detroit, Friday, Sunday, Monday. You could also hang on to your Pistons if you really wanted to. They're off Tuesday, Wednesday, but they play Thursday, Saturday, Sunday of next week. So their schedule actually has a second 3 games in 4 days. I don't know. I might move along during that in-between. Also on the radar for that similar scheduling quirk, Miami Heat. We talked about them as a pickup 2 days or on Wednesday of this week. The New Orleans Pelicans, believe it or not, actually have a little small run here, sandwiched by some truly awful playoff schedules where they have 3 games in 4 days and they go 4 games in 6 days. So someone like a Frank Jackson could actually be a really good pickup in that spot, and then you move along on Wednesday of next week. The Knicks, they go 4 times next week, including a game on Monday, and it goes Friday, Sunday, Monday. So you could, if there's anybody that's, and they have a lot of fringe guys. Emmanuel Mudiay is a fringe guy that's probably available. Damian Dotson, Alonzo Trier, guys like that you can't really trust long-term. But if you want to ride them for 6 games in 10 days or even just 3 games in 4 days, then you freaking go for it. Might be it. No, Phoenix and Portland, they go Friday, Saturday, Monday, so it's not the back-to-back over the weekend, or rather the back-to-back that stretches between 2 periods, but it does fit that mold. The San Antonio Spurs and the Washington Wizards are also in that mix. Spurs, very similar to the Knicks, they go 4 times next week as well, so if you had someone there, you could hang on to them. Marco Bellinelli is a possibility. Bryn Forbes, Patty Mills. Mostly if you're streaming 3-pointers, that's a team that makes a lot of sense. Knicks are a team if you're streaming points. Pelicans, a guy that potentially has a very large usage bump with Drew Holiday out. Miami just has a lot of guys to pick from. I think tomorrow is going to be a really important day for those of you making streaming decisions leading into next week. So you'll have some options, and I suggest that you pore over them. And you should also, by the way, have a pretty good idea of what categories you're going to need this week. For instance, I'm basically hunting 3-pointers. I know that if I win points and 3-pointers, I win my weekly matchup. Straightforward, right? So I'm looking for somebody who's going to bang in some threes and score some buckets. And there are plenty of guys, actually, that I could grab on Friday that fit that description. Frank Jackson being one of them. Guys on the Knicks being one of them. Blazers and Suns, not so much. Spurs, yeah, they're in the mix. All those guys I was just talking about, threes and points. So they're out there. I think Friday's going to be a really interesting day for streaming. Make your decision wisely. I don't know that you even have to do it at 12:01 a.m. because there's so many names to pick from. You could even wait, do it at the last minute, see if your opponent shows his hand first. All right, I think that'll about do it, believe it or not. I warned you guys that some of these Tuesday, Thursday shows would be a little bit shorter. Today's is, although I also didn't do any promo on today's podcast, and that will not suffice. Wow. Huge number of you have reached out as per the Who Wants to Learn How to Be a Blurber request here at Hoop Ball. It's still out there. You know, we're still, if you're interested, we're taking recruits. And that doesn't mean that everybody's going to get to do it. It means that you need to have some kind of writing experience. That doesn't mean that it needs to be a writing job, but, you know, maybe you had to write some stuff in college. Like, simple as that. You need to have a decent grasp of the English language. And I don't mean that in any kind of denigrating fashion. It just is what it is. Our editing team cannot teach someone how to write, but they can teach someone who knows how to write sports. That's where the disconnect can become a connect. So if you are confident in your writing ability and you want to learn how to become a blurber, this is very much an entry-level deal here at Hoop Ball. This is like a trainee spot. You're learning how to work the wire, how to follow all the hottest breaking news in the NBA, and if you're great at it, and if things pan out, then it could grow into something more. So continue to reach out on Twitter at Dan Vespers if you're interested in that. There's quite a few of you that are doing it already. I'm trying to keep all my emails straight. Again, if you won the DFS contest yesterday, let me know. I'm always checking the computer. I'm always around. I want to make sure that we get all of these prizes sent out. And then finally, rate and review the pod. You know I'm going to keep hitting you with that as we work towards the end of the year. Rate and review the podcast. I will love you forever. Brewski, tomorrow we'll talk about a playoff week. Not quite in review, but as we head towards the weekend, we'll get into some streaming stuff with Brew. We'll talk some big storylines of the week. That'll be a recorded pod this week. We're not going live on this one. We will, however, be live a week from tomorrow, and I hope you guys will join us for that one. That may be, that'll be one of our last live shows. Maybe the second to last. Penultimate. That's everybody's favorite word, penultimate. But it'll be recorded this week, so you don't have to set your calendar or anything like that. I am Dan Vespers. This is Fantasy NBA Today, brought to you by Hawaiian Isles Kona Coffee Company and Hoop Ball. Have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful Thursday with more action than usual. Good luck with your streams. Make your right plays, close your eyes, and hope they work. And we'll talk to you tomorrow. So long, everybody.
This has been a Hoop Ball presentation.